rise today at second reading of the Wartime Service Recognition Act. At the core, this bill addresses a simple but profound question. How do we as a country recognize service and sacrifice of those who serve in uniform and were sent into harm's way? For many Canadians, the answer seems very obvious. When we think of conflicts like the Persian Gulf or Afghanistan, we think of war. We think of those who serve in uniform operating in dangerous conditions, facing real risk, and in some cases, making the ultimate sacrifice. But here's the reality. Canada has not formally designated wartime service since the Korean War. That gap between what Canadians believe and what our system recognizes is what this bill seeks to address. This is not about rewriting history. It is not about assigning labels after the fact. And to be clear, this bill does not create a new or affect any existing benefits or pensions in any way. It does not amend the Veterans Wellbeing Act or the Pension Act. It's not about compensation. It is about recognition. It is about ensuring that when those in uniform are sent into combat or combat-like conditions, their service is assessed based on what they actually faced, not on what the missions were called at the time. As one veteran put it, we didn't need someone to declare it was a war for it to feel like one. Honourable Senators, recognition does matter. This is not an abstract issue. It's about the men and women in uniform who we ask to serve. It's about whether those live the experience and who continue to live with them. As Afghanistan veteran Lieutenant retired Colonel Dane Trombley said, "We were at war, engaged daily against a determined enemy, independent on trust in one another, on our chain of command, and Canada itself. That trust matters, and recognition is part of that trust. This bill is grounded in a simple principle. Recognition should reflect what those in uniform were sent to do, what they face, not what the missions were called. This is the principle before us here today. Colleagues, the gap that this bill addresses did not emerge overnight. It reflects how the nature of conflict has changed and how our system has not kept pace. Since the Korean War, Canada has participated in numerous operations that involve real risk, real danger, and real sacrifices. In Afghanistan alone, 158 armed forces members lost their lives. Thousands more returned home with physical and psychological injuries. In the Persian Gulf, Canada forces were engaged in combat operations, enforcing sanctions, conducting air missions, and operating in an environment where the threat of life was real and constant. And yet, despite these realities, our system has not formally recognized this service as wartime service. This has created an inconsistency. It has created confusion. And most importantly, it's created a gap between lived experience and official recognition. This is the gap this bill seeks to close. One Persian Gulf veteran, Warrant Officer retired Mike McLennan, described the moment he realized the gap between what he lived and what the system recognized. He recalled a conversation years later with a fellow veteran. "We went to war." "Right. Yes, of course." "Well, according to the government, we have never been to war." He described that moment as feeling like, "I had just been punched in the face." Honourable Senators, this is what lack of recognition feels like. Mr. McLennan went on to describe what many veterans experience as a result: a loss of pride, a sense of disconnect, even what clinicians now understand as moral injury. This bill is about preventing that. Persian Gulf veterans have been clear that what they experienced was war in every meaningful sense. Persian Gulf veterans of Canada said the following about this bill. This framework addresses the historical oversight and ensuring veteran service is recognized with the dignity, consistency, and accuracy it deserves. This bill is deliberately focused and deliberately disciplined. It does not create a new or affect any existing benefit, pension, or compensation. It does not amend the Veterans Wellbeing Act or the Pension Act. Those are important questions, but they are not the question before us, colleagues. The question before us is simple. Does Canada recognize wartime service on what out of those in uniform were sent to do and what they faced? This bill ensures that that question is answered clearly, consistently, and transparently. The bill does not attempt to declare specific missions as wartime service. Instead, it establishes a national framework, one that is structured, principled, and grounded in evidence. At its heart, this bill says something very simple. Recognition should be based on what those in uniform actually faced. The objective criteria in the bill focus on the condition of service and include exposure to hostile or life-threatening environment, the nature, scale, and duration and intensity of the operations, exposure to conditions capable of causing physical or psychological injury, and the presence of armed conflict. As Afghanistan veterans retired Colonel Mark Gasparcho noted in reflecting on military service, ultimate liability is a legal requirement for Canadian Armed Forces members to accept that they may have to risk their lives to achieve the success in missions assigned by the Government of Canada. Honourable Senators, if we ask those in uniform to accept that level of responsibility, we must ensure that their service is recognized and based on the reality of what they actually faced. The Bill 4 criteria are not arbitrary. They reflect in part the findings of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, which emphasized that the recognition must be based on what those in uniform experienced, not what missions were labeled. And they draw from our allies like Australia, assess service based on risk, condition, and exposure to harm. But let me be clear. This bill does not import other countries' system. It takes inspiration from best practices and adopts them to the Canadian context. Importantly, these criteria are not the final word. They are the floor. The bill requires the government develop a full framework through mandatory consultation with veterans, the armed forces, Veterans Affairs, and military experts and historians, and other stakeholders, including those who serve alongside or in support of Canadian Forces operations. These include respectfully and appropriate way, acknowledging others, such as members of the RCMP, who have in some cases served in support of Canadian military operations. The bill does not predetermine outcome, but it ensures that those voices are heard in development of the framework. This is how we get it right, by grounding decisions in lived experience, informed expertise, and open consultation. This bill establishes clear timelines. Within 1 year, the government must develop and table a framework. Within 180 days after that, it must review all Canadian Armed Forces operations since July 27 of 1953. And going forward, operations must be assessed within a defined period. These timelines matter. They ensure this work is not delayed or deferred. For every day we wait, another veterans die, and of course their service is not acknowledged. This work will not sit on a shelf. Equally important is transparency. The bill requires that the recommendations be made public, along with other explanation how the criteria were applied. It requires the creation and of creation of a consolidated, publicly accessible list of all operations reviewed and their status. This is about accountability. Decisions must no longer happen behind closed doors. They will be public, explained, and accounted for. Honourable Senators, this approach, I think, reflects a broader principle that recognition should not depend on the description alone. It should follow from a clear and consistent and transparent process. Now some may ask, why does it matter? It matters because recognition is not symbolic in the abstract. It is personal. It speaks to whether those who serve feel that their country understands what they were asked to do. In Afghanistan, 158 Canadian Armed Forces members lost their lives. Thousands more returned home with injuries, visible and invisible. But beyond the numbers is the lives lived reality. As Afghanistan veterans, Mark Esperto put it, we knew what we were in. We were fighting a determined enemy. This was not theoretical risk. This was the daily reality. Lieutenant Colonel Tremblay reflects not just on the battlefield, but on the lasting impact. That trust extended beyond the battlefields to our families, who carry the burden of uncertainty, separation, and long-term consequences long after the deployment ended. Honourable Senator, this bill is about ensuring that reality of Canadian Armed Forces members is recognized. This bill does not seek to reopen old debates. It does not seek to assign blame, and it does not seek to dictate outcomes. What it does is create a fair and a structured way to assess service, one that reflects in the reality of modern conflicts. It also assigns the commitment already made. In 2025 election platform, the government committed to expanding recognition of service by reviewing the designation of certain missions, including the Persian Gulf, to ensure that veterans' sacrifice in conflict zones are properly recognized. This bill gives effect to that commitment in a way that is transparent, accountable, and grounded in principle. And it does so while respecting the role of government. The Minister of Defense assesses and makes recommendations. Cabinet makes final decision. What changes is not who decides, but how those decisions are made. Colleague, let me conclude. In closing, at its heart, this bill is about fairness and respect for veterans who served in uniform. It's about ensuring that those who serve in comparable conditions are recognized in a comparable way. It's about closing the gap that has existed for decades, quietly but meaningfully for those who lived it. It's also about who we are as a country and our commitment to those who serve. We often speak rightly of Canadian values, of service, of sacrifice, of responsibility. We take pride in the men and women who wear the uniform, who represents Canada abroad, and who accept risk on our behalf. But pride must be matched by recognition. When we send those in uniform in the dangerous and uncertain environment, we carry a responsibility not only to support them while they serve, but to recognize that service fully, honestly, when they return home. This bill is one step towards meeting that responsibility. Let me be clear. This bill does not create new benefits or pension. It's about recognition and recognition alone. It also does not claim to answer every question. It does not attempt to settle every debate. But it does establish a path forward, a path grounded in fairness, transparency, and respect. A path that says we will work at what we face when we send you on a mission. We will listen to your experience, and we will ensure that recognition reflects reality. Honourable Senators, we ask Canadians in uniform to accept unlimited liability, to go where they're sent, to face risks most of us would never know. and to do so in service for this great country of ours. In return, we owe them something fundamental. We owe them recognition that reflects the reality of their service. Colleague, this is not about how service was labeled. It's about whether we are prepared to recognize it for what it was, and whether we're prepared to do so fairly, consistently, without hesitation. This is the standard this bill sets, and is one I think we should meet. Thank you so much.
Question? Senator Houston, will you take a question?
Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much, bro. I'd like you to share with your Senate colleagues just who would be advocating for this bill initially and in the early stages here, and if anybody would be contrary to the idea of a bill such as this. I just wanted to get the bro thing in.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, bro. The veterans that came to see me to talk about this was the Persian Gulf veterans. Before they came to see me in my office, they spent 8 years advocating for the government to recognize their service and to do the appropriate thing. As they were telling me their story, I was scratching my head out of disbelief what I was hearing, but more importantly, why it seemed so complicated. Because I believe, since, of course, the Korean War, we have sent many of our armed forces members into battle on behalf of our nation. It seemed very logical to me when they come home, we should recognize them for their contribution on behalf of the nation and do so in an appropriate way that reflects the reality of our own values as a country. But yet, despite their best advocacy, that has not happened. So it's on their behalf that we drafted the bill, but they were very clear about one thing. While they were advocating for themselves because they have an organization called the Persian Gulf Veterans Organization, they wanted to ensure that all those who have served before them and who will serve after them be equally recognized. And they said, Senator, if you could draft a bill to reflect that reality, not only would you be serving us, you'd be serving all veterans who are relying on the good service as parliamentarian to do the right thing.
Senator Housakos, did you want to take the adjournment? No. Senator Carignan.